Since gaining independence in 1923, Turkey has experienced several conflicts with their Kurdish minority, who make up nearly 20% of their population. Today I'm going to give a quick overview of these wars by constructing a timeline of the conflict over the past century. Like many wars in the Middle East, Turkey's Kurdish conflict has its roots in the post-World War I carve-up of the Ottoman Empire. By the war's end, the Ottoman Empire was dead, and most of its lands were occupied by other powers, such as Britain and France. To receive support during the war from its inhabitants, Western powers made promises to various groups. The post-war settlement was going to provide for an independent Arab state, as well as Kurdish. However, Britain and France promptly broke these promises and kept the region under their control. This was a bitter disappointment for many Arab and Kurdish nationalists. The Kurds of Turkey had a different experience. Anatolia was being prepared to be carved up into various zones of influence by powers such as Britain, France, and Greece. This was a nightmare for Turkish nationalists who dreamed of their own state. In 1919, a rebellion began in Samsun, led by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. The revolt quickly spread and turned into an outright war of independence, with heavy fighting in the west against Greece. The Kurds, for their part, largely supported the Kemalist movement. This was in part due to the promises made to them by Ataturk. In a 1919 interview, Ataturk was quoted as saying, quote, "In accordance with our constitution, a kind of local autonomy is to be granted. Hence, provinces inhabited by Kurds will rule themselves." Ataturk also used Islam as a uniting force against the Christian invaders and promised to conserve the caliphate. He also promised to liberate the Kurds of Mosul from Britain. For a brief period, these promises worked in solidifying support for the Kemalist war effort, but things quickly began to fray. Koçgiri. The first Kurdish revolt against the Kemalists occurred in 1921 in the Alevi region of Dersim, now known as Tunceli. The rebels demanded acceptance by Ankara of Kurdish autonomy as agreed in the Sèvres Treaty, a release of Kurdish nationalist prisoners, the withdrawal of Turkish officers from Kurdish-dominant regions, as well as the Koçgiri region, which had not been covered in the Sèvres Treaty. The revolt was badly organized and had limited appeal for many Sunni Kurds, who did not feel comfortable supporting Alevis. It was quickly crushed by the Kemalists, who pacified the region in months. Sheik Said. The next large-scale rebellion occurred in 1925. This was led by a sheikh named Said, who at 60 years old was one of the wealthiest Kurds in the country. The immediate causes of the rebellion was the abolition of the caliphate and the rejection of Kurdish autonomy by the Kemalists, following the creation of the Turkish state in 1923. In the elections of that year, Kurdish candidates were even replaced by the government. The Kemalists began a whole suppression of Kurdish culture. The Kurdish language, dress, and music were outlawed. The Said rebellion was much larger than in 1921. Around 52,000 Turkish soldiers were mobilized to suppress it, with the Kurdish side numbering in the tens of thousands. Despite some initial success, the rebellion collapsed following a failed attack on Diyarbakir by Sheik Said. One partial reason for their failure was that the Kurdish Alevis of Dersim did not join the rebellion, but sided with the Kemalists. It took several months for the revolt to be suppressed. Sheik Said was quickly hanged along with 52 of his followers in Diyarbakir following its conclusion. It is hard to determine how many died in the fighting, but one US historian estimates less than 5,000 men were killed on both sides. Ararat Revolt. Kurdish guerrillas, a constant threat in this period, began to gather near the mountain of Ararat. By 1927, they were routinely attacking Turkish convoys and had declared independence, naming their nation the Republic of Ararat. By 1930, the threat warranted a Turkish force of 62,000 to crush the rebels. The fighting was severe, with the Kurds even managing to shoot down several Turkish planes, and taking hundreds of Turkish soldiers prisoner. Despite these setbacks, Turkey succeeded in crushing the nascent republic. Tens of thousands were killed in the fighting, and in the aftermath, the Turkish government brought in severe policies aimed at preventing a recurrence. Dersim. Kurdish resistance to the state had been severely hampered by 1936. However, Dersim region was still seen as a possible threat, and plans were made to forcefully empty it of its inhabitants. This was violently rejected by the largely Alevi Kurds, and a force of 60,000 Turks were sent to suppress them. Demographic engineering had been used in the past by both the Ottoman and Kemalist governments against the Kurds. Dersim was simply the continuation of one long deportation policy. Resistance against Turkish moves was bitter, but ultimately, the Kurds were crushed at the cost of 40,000 lives. There are some who label the event as an act of genocide or ethnic cleansing. I do not know enough to comment, but I want anyone watching to be aware of the severity of the devastation brought on Dersim. In 1948, the region was still in ruins, as described by a Turkish correspondent who visited Dersim for the Turkish daily Sun Posta. Quote, "The place was desolate. There are no more artisans, no more culture, no more trade. I met unoccupied people, whose life now seems to revolve around a flock of 100 goats. There are no schools, no doctors. The people don't know what the word medicine means. If you speak to them of the government, they translate it as a tax collector and policeman. We give the people of Dersim nothing. We only take. We have no right to carry on treating them like this." PKK insurgency. Following the severe levels of violence in the 1920s and 1930s, the decades following Dersim was comparatively peaceful. This changed in 1978 with the foundation of the PKK, a separatist guerrilla group led by a charismatic and ruthless figure named Abdullah Öcalan. Öcalan led the group from his base in Syria until his capture in 1999. As of 2025, he is still in a Turkish prison. The PKK insurgency has been transnational in nature, with Kurdish guerrillas launching attacks from Iraq and to a lesser extent Syria. This has seen several Turkish military campaigns within those countries that continue today. The fighting has killed some 40,000 people since 1978, with violence peaking in the 1990s. PKK conflict in 2025. As of 2025, the Turkish military continues its fight against the PKK in the Iraqi mountains. To support this effort, there are currently over 100 Turkish bases in northern Iraq. The PKK continues to launch attacks within Turkey, such as in October of 2024, when gunmen killed 5 and injured 22 in Ankara. The attack targeted a company that produces military equipment for Turkey. Despite this violence, there has been some positive indications that peace talks are again in the works between the PKK and the Turkish government. A recent Turkish politician even floated the idea recently of Öcalan being released from prison as part of a peace deal. It remains to be seen how these talks will play out. If the past is any indication, it will take much more to secure a lasting peace within Turkey. Thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.